how foraging kind of hurt restaurants and what we can learn from that, what the federalized takeover of D.C. has done to restaurant reservations over the last month, and how McDonald's is winning where fast casual is losing. All this and more in today's Repertoire report. I am Ray DeLucci. Thank you for tuning in. It has been a crazy, crazy month in the food world. I mean, so many different episodes over the last few weeks. A lot of great views and feedback. So if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, please leave a review. It helps us get a lot more traction and just a lot going on in the food world. So stay with us. We're updating you every week. And we'll start out today with an article that was published in Eater. This article is called When Foraging Went Viral, Chefs Lost the Plot. This is by Nick Curtin. And the subtitle goes, As the chef forager became a trend, then a cliche, it created a trap for many restaurants. We're just now starting to break out. So this is by Chef Nick Curtin. He is the co-owner and executive chef of one Michelin-starred and one Michelin Green-starred restaurant, Alouette, in Copenhagen. And a pretty incredible article. I really suggest you go read it. And the idea of this article is that Chef basically shares a very interesting take on the foraging movement that really dominated the 2010s with the rise in popularity of Noma. Being in Copenhagen, being in Denmark, seeing that rise, and then kind of the dichotomy of that as compared to American restaurants and how chefs basically undertook the foraging movement and made it their own. This idea of industrializing a movement that was really focused on really hyper local ingredients, niche ingredients, and ingredients that were really only ever meant to be showcased in smaller restaurants and for smaller examples. And for me, this article was a really great read. He goes on to say that restaurants like Noma led the charge in the foraging expedition. When I was in culinary school, Noma was the rage. I went there in 2015, and all you heard about was Rene Redzepi and Noma. And he has this really interesting example of in the mid 2010s when ramp foraging was the craze in the United States. And I remember this, and we'll get back to that. Basically, he highlights that when Chef Redzepi was kind of building Noma and when he came on the scene, he had this idea for Denmark. Denmark didn't really have a culinary identity, he shares, or really didn't have like this idea of a farm to table movement. And I think in America, we take this for granted, but a location like Denmark, they didn't have that. So they really just had this like really industrialized food system, and it really strained from consumer demand, and they didn't have these like hyper local fixations on ingredients. And basically, Rene Redzepi revolutionized in Denmark, in Copenhagen as well, like what it meant to be a chef and cooking, and what it meant to cook locally. So his vision was for building on these like small familial traditions that he had seen in Denmark that had inspired him. This idea of foraging for chanterelles or going to look for chestnuts and then putting those in a dish and cooking with those. Rene Redzepi took that and marketed it to a broader audience and really brought in A, fine dining, but also B, this idea of localized cooking in Denmark. And Chef Curtin shares that they really didn't have this. So Rene was the outlier. He was a chef that was like, okay, we don't have this. This is what I want. This is what I crave. And let me go build this. Let me go share this idea of cooking, share this idea of hospitality, and bring it to the mass market. I don't know that he thought he would have the success that he did have, but this idea of going against the norm was really, really successful for him. So Chef goes on to share this idea of wild washing. So this idea of wild washing comes into view with the idea of either larger restaurant groups or even larger food companies having the foraging aesthetics put into their concepts or their products. So marketing to consumers to promote restaurants in a certain way. The idea of the chef with long hair and a beard going out into the forest and picking your different items and putting it on the menu later on that night. The trend becomes synonymous with Nordic cuisine, even though he notes Noma moved away from it in 2017. This cuisine type did dominate the 2010s, and it really started to influence European cooking and also United States cooking. And this demand, he states, damaged Denmark's food supply in kind of an unexpected way. So like I said before, he uses the ramp trend in the United States as a perfect example as to how foraging, once popularized, went from this really like beautiful niche and almost connecting you to your local food system way of cooking to something that was kind of damaging. And he shares that a lot of chefs in the United States would go and they would forage for ramps and they wouldn't do it correctly. He goes, quote, take what happened with ramps in the US in the early 2010s. What was once a special hyper seasonal product became ubiquitous. The ramp craze inspired armies of foragers to traps through delicate spring forests, mashing flora and fauna underfoot as they pulled up entire ramp patches, root and all. A wild foods advocate Russ Cohen advises that the sustainable way to forage for ramps is to pick one leaf off each plant, leaving the bulb to continue to reproduce. And this idea that, chefs would just go in and totally uproot mass amounts of ramps for their restaurants. And I was a part of this ramp foraging craze. I remember my first true restaurant job before culinary school in a professional kitchen. We had all gone out to forage for ramps one day. It was like everyone wanted that on menus and chefs wanted to work with it. He goes on to say in the article that it's not quite fair to say that before Noma, Denmark had no established dining culture. But the reality isn't far off. There wasn't a strong culture of dining out, and Danish cuisine was largely based around simple preparations with a backbone of French technique. There were two major challenges for chefs: lack of customer demand for fine dining and ingredients drawn from large scale agricultural export industries. Noma radically changed the former, bringing in money, tourism, and skilled labor without affecting the latter. In the US, the farm to table movement, spearheaded by chefs like Alice Waters, Dan Barber, and Tom Colicchio, led to the rise of grocery stores like Whole Foods, which attracted customers with a range of organic produce and sustainable proteins. Following Noma and the new Nordic wave, Danish home cooks might find pots of Ribena or ransom at their local grocer, but staples like fresh seafood or kale remained rarities. And I found this very fascinating because I think when I thought of Noma, it's like this is as close as you can get to local food, to local cooking, right? But what has happened in Denmark is the rarity items, such as sea buckthorn or different niche herbs, are available, but they lack the diversity and locality of mainstay products. So he cites in the article, if you wanted to go buy pork, there's only two different breeds you can choose from. Tomatoes come all the way from Italy. And this behavior of hyper fixating on the local foraging trend has allowed Denmark and the cuisine of Denmark to miss the broader ideal of the farm to table movement of working with your local producers, working for diversity of farmers, and really risking a monoculture in the food system that he believes puts the Danish food system at risk. Quoting the article, in a country that counts 5 pigs for every resident, where 80% of the agricultural land is allocated for growing feed, one bout of hoof and mouth disease could mean full system collapse. Diners have poured money into foraging focused restaurants. In a low margin business like restaurants, the temptation is to follow the path of least resistance, to hop on trend. In a free market system, if the consumer doesn't demand this diversity, the market won't supply it. But restaurants are uniquely positioned to influence taste and create future demand, if and how they do so is a choice. He shares that Denmark is moving away from the foraging craze and it is starting to embrace a farm to table movement. Quote, Chef Rosio Sanchez forewent imported tomatillos for her salsa verde at her restaurant Sanchez, instead turning to local gooseberries. Jonathan Tam explores contemporary takes on his Cantonese heritage at Ja Tak with almost entirely local products. Chefs like Sanchez and Tom aren't just bringing global cuisines to Danish tables, they're giving local farmers desperately needed attention, funding, and creative licenses to diversify their crops. For decades, Denmark has quietly grown arguably the best peas, rhubarb, strawberries, and asparagus in the world. Today, we are experiencing an agricultural renaissance, adding tomatoes, chilies, lemongrass, and husk cherries to the list of great Danish products. Chefs don't need to hand forage for ants that happen to share aromatic compounds with lemongrass when we can just grow the plant itself. And so at Alouette, his restaurant, he has this idea of the plot system. And this is how he goes about creating products or creating the tasting menus at his restaurant, where each series of dishes that he serves reflects the products and growing methods of a single producer. Quote, the world is facing dramatic agricultural changes in the next 25 years. At the current rate, farmland won't be able to feed the growing global population by 2050. Not because we don't have enough land, but because we're using our current farmland inefficiently. At the moment, about half of the world's crops feed people, while the other half feed livestock, biofuel companies, and other industrial products. About half of all food by weight is wasted rather than eaten, partly because people buy too much and partly because of faulty supply chains. Water, fertilizer, and farm equipment could all be used better. All of these problems are solvable. if we empower the farmers interested in solving them rather than accept the industrial farming system as it is. So it's a really interesting point, and I want to take a step back here to kind of recognize and reflect on what Chef says. Jumping to farm to table and then going to foraging made more sense. Going and jumping to foraging, as he says, has caused chefs to lose the plot. So while we become hyper fixated on the one niche mushroom in the woods out in our restaurants community, or the very special herb you can only get at one point of the year, we've missed this idea, and that he argues in Denmark, and I would argue in the United States as well, of the fact that all of the other items, the commodity items that we need to keep our menu bolstered, still come from mass industrialized food centers. And so it's if we're going to claim we're sustainable, if we're going to claim we're focused on local and only use the highlighted niche ingredients, well, the rest of our menu is being held up by industrialized products, then that is an issue, and it is something that is concerning for restaurant owners. So in that sense, I really think he has nailed this idea that like chefs have cast themselves as the star of the show in the wild foraging era. And his kind of argument is there's no reason why chefs cannot do the same when it comes to ethical and responsible sourcing in 2025. So, in this framework of we are not victims of consumer demand, but rather we set the consumer demand. And he gives us the example of Noma in the beginning to show like Rene Redzepi and his team totally changed the way that that nomadic cooking was viewed. The cuisine of Denmark, how that was viewed, radically changed it. And that was because was persistent, he had a vision, he had a goal, and he wanted to change the idea of what it meant to be a Danish cook. And so we can use the excuse that consumers don't want X, Y, or Z, but we as chefs have the ability to set consumer demand. Quote, chefs should be concerned less with exotic and esoteric forage ingredients as a basis for their cuisine, and instead be looking to forge meaningful, supportive relationships with farmers. They're uniquely positioned to create and reinforce demand for biodiversity, sustainability, and conscientious dining. The future is not a single chef, alone in the forest, plucking wild herbs as garnish. The future is a community, growing, cooking, and serving together. And so my takeaway from this article is one that is greatly inspiring and encouraging. That we as a food community need to be better about working with each other. And we as a food community need to stop chasing the niche one-off ingredients, but rather focus and find beauty in the ability to use local crops, or helping farmers in some way and helping producers in some way better themselves through business practices that highlight the care and ability and talent that these producers have. Like, it's great that we can put red vein sorrel on something, but also everything else that holds up our dishes should have a story to tie in as well locally. We should be able to integrate more into our local food systems. We should be able to utilize more efficiently our farmlands. And that's just not happening right now. So, a great article in Eater. You know, I talked to Justin a little bit on this, and he was also really impressed. But Nick Curtin just did a great job. I highly recommend reading it. But again, this idea that the excuse, customers won't like that. They won't go for it. And at the same time, we'll praise Rene Redzepi for his foresight and his ability to change how we view the cuisine of Denmark and what he did to cuisine and what people wanted to cook in the 2010s. And if anything, that should be an example as we set the demand if we work hard enough to do so. And so it's up to us to set the right demands and the right wants and needs for future generations of cooking. So I love that piece and would love to hear your thoughts. All right. Let's go over to Washington, D.C. As you will know, the federal government has used the National Guard to federalize the police force in some way, or police enforcement in the city. And I think, you know, there's a lot of obviously political discourse around this, a lot of the worry that comes with it. But I think one thing that is not seen, and usually is not seen, and something that I will always say is not seen enough, is how decisions like this will affect restaurants and local business owners. So if you look at Nation's Restaurant News and Eater, both covered this because of the effects it's having on the restaurants in Washington, D.C. So if you go to Nation's Restaurant News, Their article is titled "Washington D.C. Restaurant Reservations Plummeted Following Federal Takeover," and this was written by Alicia Kelso. This is August 19th, 2025. The executive editor of Nation's Restaurant News. And like reservations have dropped because of this presence of a federalized police force in Washington, D.C. So, quote, according to new data from OpenTable and analyzed by WUSA 9, online reservations fell 16% year over year on the first day of the deployment of National Guard in Washington, D.C. By August 13th, reservations were down 31%. They recovered slightly by August 16th, a Saturday, which is a busy restaurant day, though they remained down by 20% versus the same period in 2024. The really, really important sticking point to how this is affecting restaurants is DC experienced year over year growth in reservations every month before August this year, according to OpenTable data. So, what is going on in DC is drastically impacting restaurants. So, then we go over to Eater. And quote, Chef Lincoln Fugue, who runs Present Company Public House in Chinatown, calls the federal response in a compact city of 700,000 residents overkill. He continues, we don't need National Guard troops from any state to be posted here. We are not perfect, but we are not a lawless dystopia that needs a military presence. So there's been this idea that DC restaurants are still doing well. The president has said this. The numbers, quoting the numbers say otherwise. DC restaurant reservations have seen the sharpest fall among 20 large cities in America so far in August, per OpenTable data crunched by WUSA 9. The study reported that the number of year-over-year diners dipped by 31% on Wednesday, 2 days after Trump called on the National Guard to patrol Washington. It was also down every day after that. On Monday, August 18th, online reservations declined by 22%. The timing could not be worse for DC's biannual Metropolitan Washington Restaurant Week, which started on August 18th and runs through August 21st, with a record 380 participants offering three-course deals to boost slower summer sales. Many opt to extend their deals into the following week. Megan Tolman, the director of operations at Detroit-style pizza bar Red Light, sums up the downtown mood as super somber, especially on her restaurant's 14th Street corridor. The go-to industry hotspot typically slings square slices and shots until 1 a.m. on weekdays. But on Wednesday night, when federal agents set up lit-up checkpoints on the nightlife strip, Red Light's business completely died down after 8 p.m., leaving her no choice but to cancel its weekly karaoke party. We had nothing Wednesday night, she says. No one was there. It was a ghost town. Khalid Pitts, who co-owns Cork Wine Bar down the street, agrees the extra policing is a turnoff. They're making their presence felt and not in a way that makes people feel safe, says Pitts. One of the Restaurant Week participants is British pub Duke's Grocery, which offers $25 lunch and $40 dinner deals to include its famed proper burger and toffee pudding. Quote, DC thrives when we show up. Now is the time to be present. In our neighborhoods, our local shops, our bars and restaurants, our gyms, dry cleaners, and coffee shops, owner Danielle Kramer tells Eater. We've weathered COVID and government shutdowns, and we'll get through whatever comes next. And one last bit I will share is the Jose Andres commentary on this, where Jose Andres basically calls out the president, saying Washington, D.C. is not only our nation's capital, it's a beautiful city that 700,000 people call home. I'm proud to run a business and raise a family here. D.C. doesn't need federalized troops. It needs leaders who respect our fundamental founding principles of democracy, dignity, and respect. Bring this up because this is affecting restaurants. Obviously, a lot is affecting restaurants right now through the administration's policy, but what is going on right now in DC? There's irrefutable data from OpenTable that reservations are down. Restaurants are being affected. So to say otherwise is just simply lying to the American public. The reservations being down is a key indicator that what is going on right now is harming. And so I just share this to say that I worry for the future, for the DC restaurants and for the future of DC restaurants. Having prominent chefs like Jose Andres share this idea that DC does not need this, that it is going to affect businesses. And obviously it goes beyond just restaurants, it's politics, but to have these decisions severely impact restaurants with no recourse or action or idea of how to help them is worrisome. Especially when during this key week, this is when restaurants are banking on a higher influx of customers, of revenue, and being able to just like make restaurant weeks are for that. And this happening is severely going to dampen that. And like I said, restaurant reservations being up every month prior to this year in OpenTable, and seeing how sharp reservations have fallen when compared to other 20 major cities shows that These federal decisions are impacting restaurateurs in DC, and it is affecting their businesses. We've covered tariffs before. We're going to be covering other initiatives within. We'll be covering different information within farming and with agriculture and everything else. So, just for DC restaurants, I hope that this federalized takeover is over sooner rather than later, because businesses are being impacted, restaurants are being impacted, and for the president to tell other people otherwise is not. It's not true. There's no data supporting that right now. Open Tables data is showing the exact opposite. That restaurant owners are suffering due to this. All right. Next in our edition of Repertoire Report. So we covered last week a Taiwanese ice cream shop called Minimal. They were the first Michelin starred ice cream shop in the guide. They were in the Taichung guide, and we were wondering if they were going to retain their stars or not. And the reason we were wondering this, if you missed last week's episode, which I highly suggest you go listen to, is because the chef of Minimal decided to not only get rid of his tasting menu, but do away with in-store dining in general. And I went and looked at the guide release on the 19th, and Minimal was not on there. So some quick thoughts. I feel like there does need to be some component of dining, and the reason why the guide cited Minimal was because of their tasting menu and how they corresponded through it. So for me, like, while yes, they might say they only focus on food, there for most restaurants probably needs to be a service aspect to them. So it's something we wanted to just follow up on, something I was interested in. I might talk with Justin a little bit more on this, but this idea that the restaurant got rid of service, got rid of its dining room, they lost their star. The quality go down. I don't know. I've never eaten there, but the whole focus was to focus just on the product only. So for me, this shows that Michelin does require some sort of service beyond the one or two food stalls that they've rewarded before, and it was interesting to see them not on the list. All right, next up, this article titled "Fast Food Showing Potential Consumer Sales Strain." This is from Newsweek. I saw this come up, and it's really more like what the fast food industry is telling us and what fast casual is telling us. And this article was written. Oh, this article was published on August 17th by Jesus Mesa, and it goes on to say, for many Americans, cutting back on dining out is one of the first signs of financial pressure, especially among lower and middle income households. This is crazy. That change is showing up in restaurant sales. Between January and March, Americans ate 1 billion fewer restaurant meals than during the same period last year, according to market research firm Circana. So-called fast casual chains like Cava, Sweetgreen, Panera Bread, and Shake Shack, viewed by many as too expensive for everyday dining, are the first to sound the distress warning. Cava, which posted double-digit same-store sales growth in the first quarter, slowed to just 2.1% in the second. Sweetgreen reported a 7.2% sales decline in Q2, while Chipotle dropped to 4%. Analysts say these chains are caught in the middle. Too pricey to compete with budget deals of fast food, yet not premium enough, which we've talked about a lot on this podcast, to justify the cost when consumers are watching their spending. So they're in this like middle ground where they're not at that place like where McDonald's is, and we're going to cover McDonald's in a minute. But they're also not offering a product that is seen as premium enough to be worth spending the money on. And the Kava CFO, Trisha Tolivar, quoted saying, there's a fog for consumers where things are changing constantly and it's hard to see the clear. Sweetgreen CEO Jonathan Naiman said the company began seeing a more cautious consumer starting in April, aligned with a dip in consumer sentiment that manifested around the time of the Liberation Day tariff announcement by President Trump. Chipotle COO Scott Boatwright pointed directly to the rise of low-cost competitors. You have to look no further than what's going on with our competitors with snack occasions or $5 meals. And note the word snack occasions and $5 meals. We will be covering that next. That's where the consumer is drifting towards. They go on to say that the restaurant slowdown is a part of a larger shift in consumer behavior. While U.S. inflation was 2.7% in July, core inflation, excluding food and energy, jumped to 3.1%, the fastest pace in 5 months. Job growth has slowed, and tariff policies are raising prices on imported goods. Combined, these factors are hitting household budgets. Tightening the belt on restaurant spending is one of the earliest signs that households are feeling economic strain, says Todd Belt, professor at George Washington University. It's not just about skipping a night out, it's about families making daily trade-offs. Finally, the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index rose slightly to 61.7 in July, up from 60.7 in June, but still down 7.1% compared to a year earlier. While views on current conditions have improved, the expectations index, which reflects long-term outlook, fell to 57.7 and remains more than 16% below where it stood last July. So, what does this mean? And we're going to go into this idea of McDonald's uh, and their meal deals and how they've been faring well. But before we do that, just some examples. So, the article goes on to say that value still wins. For example, Domino's posted a 5.6% gain in U.S. same-store sales in the second quarter. Papa John's also returned to growth after 2 straight quarters of losses. Chili's has also gained ground with its 3 for Me deal, starting at $10.99, which helped drive a 31% increase in same-store sales and a 21% boost in traffic. Taco Bell's $5 and $9 Lux Craving boxes are resonating with lower income and younger diners. On social media, consumers are vocal about the growing price gap. Quote, Sweetgreen charged extra for every small thing you would add to the bowl, and the base price is like $16. At those prices, I'll go somewhere nice, one user wrote on X. Another said $12 burrito, $3 guac, $3 drink. At that point, I'm just eating at a real restaurant. Some fast casual chains are trying to respond. Cava has added about 50,000 loyalty members a week and now counts nearly 8 million users. Sweetgreen has increased protein portions and added $13 loyalty exclusive bowls, though sales have continued to decline. I'll end on this with Chipotle's Boatwright saying, I think much of what we're experiencing now is due to macro and the consumer. The low-income consumer is looking for value as a price point at present. And why I bring all this up is I get a food news magazine every month, and they had a really, really interesting takeaway for McDonald's. So we've talked about this idea of offering value but not making it seem like a bargain bin for consumers. And McDonald's has seen some pretty great success in Q2. So Q2 for McDonald's saw an uptick in 3.8% for in the same store sales category. Value deals have been seen as a catalyst. The $5 meal deal is what is resonating with consumers. But another big key is bringing back the snack wrap. And why the snack wrap is important, as I'll share it in a second. Basically, what they did is they used a fan favorite to bring a comeback, market it, but also marketed it at a low price point of $2.99. But while they marketed the price, they really focused on this item being a fan favorite over it being a deal. The snack wrap is back, having targeted ads, having great marketing. Making sure that everyone knew the snack wrap was back was key to them seeing success in the food world and for them to see success in sales. They also saw increases internationally, focusing on new menu items, smarter pricing, and perceived value for customers. So this idea that people know when they go to McDonald's, it's cheap. Fast food is cheap. But offering value, bringing back customer favorites, customer classics, and smartly pricing has really seen an increase in these types of businesses. So a lot to be seen there. If you're a restaurant, if you're able to bring back a fan favorite to push sales, to let people know that it's back. I mean, look what EMP did with the honey lavender duck. Is this not the same model? Bringing back a fan favorite to try to bring back diners in some way. That seems to be the game plan for big chains, and that's what restaurants need to do, in my opinion. One interesting article is that the Food Institute shares that honey consumption is the highest it's ever been. They have an article by Marcy Creeder that says Hive Mentality, U.S. honey consumption sets record. So basically, quote, sugar may be the cheap go-to sweetener, but with prices rising, consumers increasingly are turning to honey, pushing consumption to record levels last year as sweets lovers turn to it for perceived health benefits, sustainability, and an overall indulgent feeling. Quote, in my 20 plus years in beekeeping, I've never fielded so many detailed questions from customers. They want to know about veromites, what we feed our bees, how royal jelly is produced, and where we source our queens. This level of engagement shows people aren't just buying honey, they're investing in understanding the entire ecosystem that produces it, says Lisa Allen, owner of the Bee Society. The movement toward honey represents consumers seeking products that are both personally beneficial and environmentally responsible, driven by a genuine awareness that bee health directly impacts our food security. Really crazy stuff. The USDA reported that demand for honey in the U.S. has nearly doubled since 1990, while sugar consumption has remained relatively flat. In 2024, honey consumption hit 688.6 million pounds, up 25% from 2023, and up more than 70 million pounds from 2021. And the idea of why is the health aspects of it. This idea that people want really good ingredients in their food, and sweeteners are a big topic right now. And what is going on is consumers are enjoying honey because of the medicinal qualities, the perceived value to the environment, and just a better alternative. So if you're a restaurant, using honey right now is a great idea. Integrating it into sweeteners, integrating it into your cooking, sharing that you're using honey in your cooking is just really, really important. So if you are a restaurant and you have baked goods or a dessert menu, honey is the way to go right now. And because U.S. diners are consuming it so much, you will likely be on a trend that brings you success. So it's just something to note in this week's update. All right, the last thing I want to share is this New York Times article that Justin and I did not get to last week. This is going to be really brief, but the article was Goodbye $165,000 tech jobs. Student coders seek work at Chipotle. Subtitled as companies like Amazon and Microsoft lay off workers and embrace AI coding tools, computer science graduates say they're struggling to land tech jobs. And this is by Natasha Singer. So they go on by interviewing a student, Miss Mishra, who is now 21, and she quotes, "The rhetoric was, if you just learn to code, work hard, and get a computer science degree, you can get six figures for your starting salary." Those golden industry promises helped spur Miss Mishra to code her first website in elementary school, take advanced computing in high school, and major in computer science in college. But after a year of hunting for tech jobs and internships, Miss Mishra graduated from Purdue University in May without a single offer. Quote, "I just graduated with a computer science degree, and the only company that has called me for an interview is Chipotle," Ms. Mishra said in a Get Ready With Me TikTok video this summer that has since racked up more than 147,000 views. Quote, "Since the early 2010s, a parade of billionaires, tech executives, and even U.S. presidents has urged young people to learn coding, arguing that the tech skills would help bolster students' job prospects as well as the economy. Tech companies promise computer science graduates high salaries and all manner of perks. The financial incentives plus a chance to work on popular apps quickly fed a boom in computer science education, the study of computer programming, and processes like algorithms. Last year, the number of undergraduates majoring in the field topped 170,000 in the United States, more than double the number in 2014, according to the Computing Research Association, a nonprofit that gathers data annually from about 200 universities. But now, the spread of AI programming tools, which can quickly generate thousands of lines of computer code, combined with layoffs at companies like Amazon, Intel, Meta, and Microsoft, is dimming prospects in a field that tech leaders promoted for years as a golden career ticket. The turnabout is derailing the employment dreams of many new computing grads and sending them scrambling for other work." And that's where I'll leave the article and talk to you all. I think we fear AI. Everyone fears AI. I fear AI. Most Americans fear AI taking away their jobs. And so I think there's two things. Restaurants are always going to be an entry point for people. They're always going to be a place for people to come and find work. And so as these new people come into restaurants, treat them well, treat them with respect. We all find ourselves going to restaurants for different purposes. And if we know that there's going to be an influx of people trying to find jobs like ours, not in restaurants, but in the food industry, like myself, I work in the food industry outside of restaurants. But if we know people are trying to come into the food industry, we should welcome them because the food industry still needs talent. Operators still need to hire. We still need talented people in our industry. So welcoming people and allowing this new wave of people to come in, I think will lead to a lot of success. Another important thing is if you are in the food industry, you should really be focusing on leveling yourself up, getting into managerial roles, obtaining different skills, becoming more valuable to offer your skill sets in different ways to different businesses in the food industry. I talked a lot on Line Cook Thoughts that if you work in restaurants, you should really focus on the skills outside of restaurants that you can use to find different jobs within the food industry that are not related to restaurants. There's so much out there right now regarding the food industry that is not restaurant related. There are a lot of opportunities, but people in restaurants often don't tend to chase them, even though they do have the skill set for some jobs. So if we know that a lot of people may be coming into restaurants because of AI displacement, you need to be ahead of that. You need to have a different skill set that sets yourself above others if you want to keep growing in the food world. There's going to be a lot of change. In my prediction, a lot of change from AI. And I feel like over the next 2 years, the food industry is going to add a lot of jobs from people that are displaced from AI. So just being aware of that, being cognizant of that, and if you're someone that works in restaurants or in the food world, Ensuring that your expertise in food is kept sacred and that you're able to move yourself forward will be key because there is going to be this influx of people coming in. I feel for those college graduates. Like graduating college in this day and age is so scary with AI, with the job market being what it is, with the economy being what it is. The last thing they need is some a-hole in the kitchen making life harder for them, especially if they're coming to try and learn a new skill set. So we should be welcoming them and training them and being kind to them. But at the same time, if you are in food, you likely have a very vast skill set that can be used in other applications outside of restaurant work. So honing that, knowing what that is, and being better prepared to take on different roles and not letting your ego get in the way, not letting closed mindedness get in the way is key, in my opinion, to find success with a lot of AI displacing people from various industries. So those are my thoughts on that. Would love to hear your thoughts and definitely check it out because if we can't have empathy for others in different industries coming to our industry, then I don't think we've grown as a food industry. I think we need to be focused on letting people come in and teaching them the right way to cook because we want to protect our industry in a way that we're not just like going to be seen as like an industry that people can't go to because we do need more people in the food world. We do need more people working in restaurants and working outside of restaurants in the food industry. So having them come in is key. So that is all I have today on my solo edition of the Repertoire Report. I really appreciate you all listening. Justin will be back next week. Also have some fun interviews coming up. But if you have any thoughts on the stories covered today, please leave it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Follow us on TikTok at Repertoire, at Instagram at our Repertoire page. And then also, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit like and subscribe. If you're following on a podcast platform, please follow along. And I will see you on the next Repertoire Report.